let me jump in. It's not going to be the most insightful thing in the world this morning, but I just felt like it was important because we're going to keep exploring some of these ideas further in the series for a few weeks. I just wanted to say this morning what was really striking me this week in terms of like a separation of justice, a biblical view of justice and social responsibility that's faithful to Jesus, that's maybe slightly separated from unhealthy versions of that in our time, is that's remembering and recommitment and understanding that justice is the Lord's. It's His to know, it's His to lead us into, it's His to understand, it's His to adjudicate, it's His to account for, it's in His timing, it's in His way. But a fast path to injustice is to try to understand and pursue it without God. That actually some of the worst injustices in history were inflicted by people who cared a lot about justice. Not by psychopaths that don't care at all about it, but people who cared a lot about justice, but cared about a version of it and went about it in a way that was completely separated from relying in full dependence on God to tell you what it is and to lead you into it. As I said earlier, my family has made a lot of intentional decisions in faithfulness to the ways we believe Jesus has been asking us to live out His concern for justice and for the poor and for the margins. A lot of these things I haven't talked a lot about publicly. I don't talk about a lot because we feel like it's important not to. I'll share about some of them here, and then you know feel free to ask me later. But I'm not going to talk about it much anymore. Following Jesus and His character and concern and His wisdom and receiving from Him instructions to engage in the world around us has led us to spend a whole lot of time building interdependent friendships among the global poor, like some of us are about to do over the next 10 days. My wife and I are deeply connected to families that we've lived life with in Juarez, Mexico, and Guayaquil and Quito, Ecuador, Constanza City, Dominican Republic, Port-au-Prince, now starting to get more connected with Manila, the gypsy villages outside of Oradea, Romania. And those friendships and extended relationships and the time that we spend among them has helped us to get a bigger and more accurate understanding of subjective terms like need and necessity and want and poverty and dependence and things that in a very sort of narrow cultural view we would come up with a definition for that would make no sense in a global relative perspective. It's been very important for us. It's why we live where we live right now in Tampa. We live in the Belmont Heights Estates housing project, which is 894 units of Section 8 government-subsidized housing. It is the largest saturation, to my knowledge, of government-subsidized housing in Tampa Bay. When we bought the house, our real estate agent said, "Are you sure that you're sure that you're sure that you want to put an offer on this house?" Because Robles Park's lease was about to be up, so now that neighborhood can gentrify. But this community has like another 40, 50 years on its lease. This isn't going to develop anytime soon. This is a terrible real estate decision. And yes, we bought it because we wanted to be in that neighborhood, and we've been there for 7 years, and we've been trying to do asset-based community development type of work in our neighborhood among our neighbors. These kinds of ideas is why our family of 5 caps our net gross expenditures for the year at $39,000 a year, and we give the rest away to our neighborhood, our city, our region, our nation, and the world. We have ministry partnerships at every level. I try to either abstain from receiving any additional salary from that, or the organization insists on paying me adequately. I appreciate that. Thank you. And then we take that money and we do with it what we will in our personal lives. Some of you that are college students or high school students might be like, $39,000. Sign me up. I'll take some of that. I'm just saying, you get to a family of 5, it is difficult. It is difficult. It's why we've started my wife and I started a very, very modest, over the last 4 or 5 years, repair service in the neighborhood, because so many of our neighbors within a 4 or 5 block radius could not find construction companies that would work with them on basic repairs as soon as they realized where they live. They wouldn't even come. They wouldn't answer the phone. They wouldn't call back. Or one of 2 options. They would either not be able to find construction companies to provide quality service, or they would find them to provide quality service but would gouge them after the fact higher on the invoicing because those companies knew that there's 15 cash loan places within a 5 or 10 block radius, and they can get it. So too many families are going with water breaks and without basic electric. They can't build or repair basic things. And so we started a very modest little repair company just to help with our neighbors. It's why we've started a little microloan program for the last 5 or 6 years in our neighborhood, which is an accessible microloan pool to help families that are in a financial crisis to keep them from crossing the doors of a cash loan place, which is going to loan shark them into generational poverty that their kids and their grandkids are going to have to deal with. We've been able to help 12 families over 5 or 6 years to prevent them from having to go through the doors of those places. And those people gladly pay back those microloans at 0% interest within a time frame, and we've got an over 90% return rate on those microloans. Part of the reason why they pay them back is because we send all of them newsletters letting them know every dollar that they pay back into the loan, the next family that it goes to, and what they're dealing with. And so people are happy to pay it back because they can see where that money's going to in the neighborhood. I'm going to give you really quickly the top 5 list of weird decisions my family makes to live on $39,000 a year. You ready for it? Really quickly. Number 5, we take our kids to the chickens in Ybor City and we call it the zoo. We just did that for Raylan's birthday last week. We literally just did that. Number 4, 2 words, Facebook Marketplace. Everything we do on it is sketchy, but it's where the deals are. It's where the deals are. Number 3, we have a suite of affordable home and auto repair services personally. We get our electric done by Pulley Electric. We get our plumbing done by Pulley Plumbing. We get our auto repair done by Pulley Auto Repair. And this suite of professional services is terrible quality. I mean, really bad repairs all the way around, but the price is just right. Number 2, Christmas shopping. We take our kids to the Dollar Tree. We give each of them $5 and their own basket, and we say, meet us back at the cashier in 10 minutes. Do what you will. Number 1, we take our kids to IKEA and call it a trip to Sweden, international excursion. This is Helsingborg right here. Welcome to Helsingborg. We've cared deeply, deeply, deeply about these issues for a long time. We put our bodies on the line. We've been extremely sacrificial. But I can name to you right now 1,000 additional ways that I knowingly or unknowingly contribute to oppression on a daily basis. It is debilitating having to think about living out these concerns in every possible way. And not just like nationally, internationally, like the clothes I buy or whatever. I can think about local issues that I've contributed to, that I have to figure out how to deal with. We've cared about this deeply for a long time, and at the same time, we mess up regularly. We don't get it right. We're probably doing more harm than we are good. We're aware of that. But the world around us has changed so much that it's become more and more difficult to talk about these things at all for the prudent, the people that appreciate their peace. It's become very difficult to talk about these things. I think part of that, it's a complicated issue. I think part of that is because sin. Rich Viotis out of New York is a pastor out of New York, and he's known very well for a lot of things, but he's the one who came up with this framework that was basically a simple way to say sin happens to and affects us at 3 different levels. The individual level, sin is an individual thing. It's an interpersonal thing. It happens and affects us interpersonally. And it's an institutional thing, systemic sin. So it's individual, interpersonal, and institutional. It happens and affects us on all 3 levels. Now, 20 years ago, most of the conversation around this stuff was identifying issues of injustice, issues of systemic problems that were observable and we were deeply concerned with, and holding those observations and those issues within an understanding of individual sin, very little concern or understanding for institutional sin. This is just a problem of the heart. We just have to preach the gospel and let all the hearts change, and then this stuff will change, right? There's no such thing as institutional or systemic sin. So the conversation was really held around, at least in my world, it was held around individual sin. And because the sin was individual, a lot of the responsibility of how to solve those things were up to God and a bit mysterious. We can trust God to deal with those things. And there was an abdication of responsibility. Now, fast forward 20 years later, and at that time, what did we do? A lot of us in this room and a lot of the sort of voice of this community spent a whole lot of time and energy forming people to think about institutional and systemic sin, because where else were they thinking about that at the time? And to not think of systems of injustice as something that's up to God and mysterious, but we actually have a part to play here. We have responsibility here to take on. And that was an important corrective word in the time because it wasn't quite as focused on. Now, fast forward 20 years, it's very different now, isn't it? I mean, at least in the worlds that I live in, most of the conversation is around institutional sin, systemic sin everywhere that we can all identify. But I haven't heard somebody confess to personal contribution to that sin in 5 years. There's almost no room anymore for individual sin, and now there's a whole lot less dependence on God to actually make things right, and it's basically all our responsibility. It's all institutional and systemic, and it's up to us to change it entirely. And so I just think it's more important ever now to not just keep swinging on the pendulum, but for us to continue to have like a biblical worldview around justice that's outside of that pendulum swinging that says, no, it's individual and it's systemic, and we have to lean on God, who is the one who sees what's happening and knows the diagnosis of it and how to deal with it. But we have a part to play. We have responsibility in it. We don't just leave it up to God and sort of carry on with our lives. We actually have a part to play. And nowadays, I feel like more and more of that conversation is around remembering that there's such a thing as individual sin and that God is the one that actually leads us to deal with these things. I recently ran operations for a national conference this last year. And afterward, because I was on the logistics side, we were soliciting feedback from people on the conference, participants on the conference. How did that go for you? What went well? What didn't go well? What feedback do you have for us for next time so that we can learn? And one of the participants responded right away, very quickly, to that solicitation for feedback and said, for all of our concern about justice, we obviously don't care to steward the earth since we had so many packages of plastic water bottles at the conference. Next time, could we instead just have people drink from the water fountains instead of ruining the earth with plastics? Now, that's fine. My gut reaction, this is my less humane, my less redeemed reaction to that feedback. My gut reaction was, she just sent that email from a plane that she took flying back to the Northeast, a plane whose jet fuel emissions did more damage to the earth than 5 years of plastic water bottle sales. And she sent that email from a phone so packed with rare earth metals that are only acquired through strip mining endeavors around the world that are not only terrible for the environment, but actually exploitative, almost always, of not just generally workers, but child labor, often. And that email was allowed to reach us from that plane with those rare earth metals through 5G towers that were sold on a bill of goods to farmers that I know around the Midwest that is not anymore a true bill of goods, and all of them want rid of those 5G towers because of what it's doing to the situation of their farmland and to their families in the future. I say all this not to dismiss her concerns or her feedback. I actually think it's good. It's decent feedback, and we're going to think about it. But just as the most recent example that I have highlighting the incredulous impossibility of us human beings having full responsibility for curating a just world. I empathize with her because I also am deeply concerned about the cause of justice in our world, and I can identify ways on a daily basis that I'm directly or indirectly involved in the continuation of some sort of exploitation and oppression in the world and suffering. I just think it's important to admit that we are often not able to discern what justice requires in any given situation, nor are we able to act on it without causing additional injustices. Sometimes we diagnose something as just and right when it's actually horribly unjust. Sometimes we diagnose something as unjust and wrong when it's really not. Sometimes we diagnose something properly as unjust, but we prescribe the wrong solution, and we make it worse. Or we make it better, but we create a different issue of injustice, compounding it for a different people group in the process. Sometimes we're completely blind or ignorant that something is unjust. And we're not even trying to diagnose or think critically about it at all. We are not wise enough to imagine or cultivate our own just world. We are woefully inadequate to the task. We are flawed, we're nearsighted, we're narrow-minded, we're biased, we see imperfectly. Deep breath. Here's the good news. Here's the really good news. God is not flawed, nor is he nearsighted, nor is he narrow-minded, nor is he biased, nor is he imperfect. God is wise enough to imagine and powerful enough to cultivate a just world. And according to Amos, here are the qualifications that someone must have in order to properly discern and cultivate a just society. Is this on your resume? It's not on mine. Can you create stars and move them into constellations and give them a name? Can you turn midnight into dawn and darken the day into night? This is what is required. Can you gather up all the waters of the sea and pour them out on the land with only your voice? This is a qualification. I mean, why are verses 8 and 9 even in there? If you try to read this again and you just leave out 8 and 9, it actually feels like it flows better. It feels like such a random aside. But I think it's critical. Why say that? Because Amos anchors God's justice as an implication not primarily of his love, which is what we often do, it's what the world often does, that justice is an outflow from this ethereal concept of love. And sometimes we can get tricked into the same thing, that justice is a direct outflow of God's love. That's not what Amos is saying. And that's often not what the Psalms, the other prophets are saying. Justice is a direct implication of God's wisdom and omnipotence. Job says the same thing. This is what Job says. If you remember Job, not many people read Job. That's a hard read. If you read Job, it's basically like some really unfair thing happens to Job, a situation that looks very broken, looks very unjust, and he just has conversations with his friends for 37 chapters about them basically trying to make sense of this, make sense of why God did this, why he let it happen, what Job did to deserve it, and basically trying to fit this into an assumed version of why God's character is still intact with this sort of thing that we're observing. And the problem with all of those friends is that they're actually approaching the situation with an assumption of wisdom. We're wise, we can work this out. And they have 37 chapters of assuming we're wise and we can work this out, and they have a lot of different iterations of trying to work that out. God shows up in Job 38. Now, the first thing he does is he doesn't say, hey, let me explain this to you guys. Let me explain it to you so that you understand it, because I know you're having a hard time understanding. This is what he says. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Remember, qualifications of who's able, who's qualified to know justice, dispense justice, curate a world that is a just world. Who's qualified? Where were you when I laid the earth's foundations? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you must know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set? Or who laid its cornerstone? While the morning stars sang together and all the angels shouted for joy. Have you ever given orders to the morning or shown the dawn its place? Have you journeyed to the springs of the sea or walked in the recesses of the deep? Have you comprehended the vast expanses of the earth? Tell me if you know all this. I don't want to waste your time. What is the way to the abode of light, and where does darkness reside? Can you take them to their places? Surely you know, for you were already born, and you've lived all these years. He's so snarky, man. You see, justice is not solely an implication of God's love. And I think when we separate justice from God's wisdom and omnipotence, we can get in a whole lot of trouble. Because there are things that we'll see that don't seem loving in our eyes. But if God is doing it and allowing it and pursuing it, there's things that he knows that we do not know because we're fools. Are we able to say that? I'm a fool. And there's things that he knows that I don't know. His thoughts are higher than my thoughts. His ways are higher than my ways. And I can trust him. Justice is the Lord's, to know and to lead us into. God is the only one qualified to know. He's the only one who has the resume to know and to account for and to adjudicate and to lead us. And he, the only one qualified, has chosen to be incomprehensibly patient and merciful toward us in our inability to remake the world in his own delight and our constant contributions to the opposite. I'm under no illusions that I can actually birth new Eden that my neighbors hunger for, that I can actually curate or contribute to a world that feels more fair or right or gives them what they are due as image bearers of God. I'm just a sheep, and the one thing I'm capable of is listening to my shepherd. And guess what? That's the only skill required. Don't need any extra wisdom, don't need any extra insights, don't need any extra skill sets. What's required is to be humble sheep who love mercy and know how to listen to the shepherd to do justice. This is why he requires of us to love mercy and to walk humbly, and not just to do justice. He doesn't require us just to do justice. That's it. That's solely what we're required to do. He does not ask of that. He also asks us to love mercy because we're recipients of a whole lot of it on a daily basis and must give it in the same way. And to walk humbly, to know that we can't know without him, that we can't do it without him, that we can't understand it without him, that we don't have the roadmap without him. This is why he requires of us to love mercy, to walk humbly, and to do justice in direct faithfulness to how he's inviting us to participate with him in his redemptive project. He can be trusted with your money. He can be trusted with your decisions. He can be trusted with your family, with your kids. He can be trusted with your sacrifices. He can be trusted with the pain that it causes. He can be trusted with your burdens. He can be trusted with all of it. Choose it. Not safety. He'll always lead you to the margins, the forgotten, the imprisoned, the needy, the outcast. And he'll often lead you to those people right where you are. You don't need to go an hour away. You don't need to go 6 hours away. But you have right where you are, where you live, work, and play, there are margins of people who are forgotten, imprisoned, have need, are outcast, are spoken against, are not fought for, do not have access. And he can lead you. Justice is the Lord's to know and to lead us into. What I'd like to do just as a way to close my time, and then we'll have communion, is I just want to let you have a little bit of a dialogue, both coming out of the text and out of just some thoughts here. Have a quick conversation at your table around two questions. I don't have a slide for this because I'm terrible at slides, so you got to actually listen to me. You got to listen to me. 2 questions. What's the injustice that the Lord is putting on your heart? So not an injustice that you just arbitrarily feel, you just read an article about and now you're passionate about. It's actually like a sense of discernment. And if you don't have one, it's okay to be like, I'm still discerning that. But if you know, like, the Lord is leading me to engage this piece of brokenness in my neighborhood, in my city, in the world, then name that with each other. And how has he led you to disrupt that injustice with your life? Not just your voice, but with your life. What's the injustice, and how are you engaged with your life? Go ahead and share at your table. We'll try to give time for as many people to share as possible, and then we'll end.